They say you shouldn't let your profession define you. But when you're a divorced mother rebuilding from the ground up, it rarely feels optional. I'm Nora Winters. I'm 42 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I was the lead market analyst at Garrison & Rhodes, a thriving financial consultancy in Boston. I was also the architect behind the proposal that secured the $25 million Westover Group account, the most lucrative in the firm's history. But my employee file won't reflect any of that. This is reality. My supervisor smirked as he pushed the termination paperwork across his glossy desk. Nothing personal. He labeled it organizational realignment. I called it treachery. The moment felt disconnected from reality. His office reeked of day-old espresso and designer aftershave, and the heating system hummed excessively loud for a January morning. I gazed at the documents before me, my hearing muffled. After 6 years of crafting the firm's most intricate market strategies, after working through weekends and missing performances and birthdays with my son Max, I was being dismissed like an expendable intern. Effective immediately. I'm sorry, Nora, he said with a half-shrug, not appearing apologetic whatsoever. But we need innovative perspectives. Fresh momentum. You understand the business. No, I didn't. Not like this. Not after everything I'd contributed. Just breathing, I reminded myself, maintaining my composure. I refused to let him witness the tremor in my hands. I wouldn't grant him that satisfaction. Thank you for the opportunity, I said softly, rising to leave. He appeared taken aback by my composure. I suspect he anticipated tears, outrage, perhaps even pleading. But when you've reconstructed your existence from fragments, you learn to depart with dignity, even when it feels like your chest is caving in. I didn't question why he hadn't acknowledged my contribution in the board meeting. The answer was obvious. 3 weeks earlier, I had completed the Westover proposal, the most sophisticated high-stakes pitch we'd ever attempted. I'd invested 4 months in it, developing the strategy, analyzing the data, aligning it with their expansion projections. It had required every ounce of my expertise. The day before the presentation, I'd discovered the final version on his desk. My name was entirely absent. Don't concern yourself, Nora, he'd said then, dismissing it like an afterthought. This is simply how these matters work. You'll receive internal recognition. I didn't challenge him. I should have. Now, I was being escorted from the premises by a personal representative I barely recognized, cardboard box in hand. My email access revoked, my security pass deactivated before I even reached the elevator in the parking structure. I remained in my car for nearly an hour, clutching the steering wheel, my pulse pounding in my throat. I wasn't merely angry. I was devastated, not because I'd been terminated, though that stung, but because I'd allowed him to exploit me. Because I'd anticipated it and still delivered everything I had to offer. As I drove home through the sleet, I contemplated Max, about the mortgage, the tuition, the orthodontic work I still needed to finance. I thought about the months of working until 2 a.m., of waking with my laptop still powered on beside me. In the evenings Max had eaten dinner alone while I completed just one more task. I recalled the time he told me, "You lack killer instinct, Nora. That's what's hindering your advancement." He was mistaken. That night, as the city froze outside my window, I opened my personal computer and logged into my private cloud storage. I'd preserved every iteration of the Westover proposal. Every revision, every annotation, including the initial concept outline with my name and timestamp. I hadn't intended to be calculating. I simply believe in safeguarding my work. What I didn't realize then, what he didn't know, is that the CEO of Westover Group, Alexandra Chen, was a former client of mine. We'd collaborated 7 years ago when she was still managing her startup. She once told me, "If you ever need a genuine opportunity, reach out. The creators deserve more than the salespeople." I never called, but perhaps the time had arrived. As I stared at my inbox, her name appeared at the top of my contacts like a forgotten promise. I began composing, subject, "The actual creator of your proposal. Alexandra, I hope this message finds you well. You might not recall me, but we worked together during your initial funding phase. I'm writing because I recently departed Garrison and Rhodes, and there's something you should understand about the Westover proposal. My fingers hovered over the send button. What I couldn't foresee was that this single email would initiate a sequence of events that would dismantle the very company that presumed they could erase me, and that within a week, I'd be sitting in the executive chair opposite my former supervisor, not as an employee, but as his client. By the time I pressed send, my hands were quivering. It wasn't fear. It was exhilaration. The kind that emerges from finally standing after being knocked down repeatedly. I didn't know if Alexandra would even read the message, much less respond, but at least I had spoken. At least I hadn't simply vanished quietly as they expected. That night I lay awake, gazing at the ceiling, the stillness of my apartment interrupted only by the sound of Max breathing softly in the adjacent room. He'd fallen asleep on the sofa, waiting for me to emerge from my bedroom. I hadn't told him what transpired yet. I didn't want to frighten him. Not until I understood what came next. At 6:54 the following morning, my phone vibrated. Alexandra Chen, Nora. Of course I remember you. I still reference the expansion model you designed for our Series C funding round. Thank you for reaching out. Let's discuss. I have some inquiries and an opportunity one believe you'll want to hear about. Alexandra. I sat upright so abruptly I nearly spilled my coffee. Alexandra Chen wasn't just the CEO of Westover Group now. She was an emerging force in the finance sector, renowned for being incisive, principled, and unafraid to disrupt conventions. If she wanted to talk, this wasn't merely a courtesy reply. I called her that afternoon. Her assistant connected me immediately. Nora, Alexandra said, her tone measured but sharp. I've examined the documents you sent. There was a pause lengthy enough for me to prepare myself, and I'm furious. I thought you should know the proposal wasn't authored by the person who presented it to you, I said, striving to keep my voice steady. That was my work. Of course it was, she said. I recognized the moment I saw the phrasing. It had your fingerprints throughout. She posed questions, precise, thorough ones about the research, the market modeling, even how I'd structured the risk mitigation strategy. I answered them effortlessly, not because I'd rehearsed, but because it was mine. Every single element of it. Nora, she said finally. I'm terminating the contract with Garrison and Rhodes, effective immediately. My heart skipped. You're certain? Absolutely. I don't conduct business with deceivers, she said, then added, and they don't reward theft. But I don't believe in allowing exceptional work to be wasted either. We still require the strategy implemented. I was already planning to launch a new division. I want you to join as a partner and COO. It's yours if you're interested. I blinked, unable to articulate a response. You always possessed a talent for development, Nora. You simply never had the platform to lead. I can provide that. But I need a prompt decision. I want to commence immediately. I was silent for a prolonged moment. I need to consider it, I said eventually, though my heart had already decided. I understand, she said. But don't deliberate too long. You deserve more than a footnote in someone else's narrative. We concluded the call and I sat in silence, the phone still in my grasp. Me. Coup. I reflected on everything that led here, the late nights, the overlooked contributions, the condescending feedback. I thought about the phrase that had haunted me since yesterday, this is how the real world works. He was right, in a sense. The real world did operate that way, until someone determined it wouldn't anymore. That evening, I told Max everything. He was sitting cross-legged on my bed, wrapped in his favorite oversized sweatshirt. They fired you? He asked, his eyes wide. But you work harder than anyone I know. I know, I said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. But it's all right. Something better might be approaching. He regarded me seriously, like only a 14-year-old who's had to mature too quickly can. Mom, are you scared? Yes, I said honestly. But I'm also prepared. The next morning, I called Alexandra. I'm in. Excellent, she said. Your new title is COO of Chin Meridian Advisors. I've already initiated the paperwork. 2 hours later, the news broke. Westover Group cancels contract with Garrison and Rhodes, citing leadership concerns. Inside sources state the company was caught unprepared. I smiled as I imagined my former supervisor's expression when he saw the headline, but that was merely the beginning. The following day, his assistant attempted to arrange a call with Westover to salvage the partnership. Alexander forwarded the email to me with a brief note: he wants to speak with the COO. Your move. And so the next morning, when the call was finally connected and his voice came through, panicked, desperate, I took a breath, straightened my posture, and delivered the words I'd been anticipating. This is Nora Winters. You're speaking with the new COO. The silence on the other end was electrifying. For a moment, all I could detect was shallow breathing. Nora, he finally said. I wasn't expecting you. I assumed not, I replied, maintaining an even tone. You were attempting to reach the COO of Chin Meridian Advisors. That's me now. He offered a weak laugh. The kind someone uses when they're scrambling to regain control of a situation they've already lost. Look, Nora, this is clearly some form of misunderstanding. I wasn't aware there was an issue between you and Garrison and Rhodes. Had I known you were still involved, I would have managed things differently. I let that linger in the air for a moment. The audacity of it. You weren't aware? I said slowly. You removed my name from the final version of the Westover proposal. You presented my work as your own. Then you terminated me 2 days later. But you weren't aware there was an issue. His tone shifted, more defensive now. I was under pressure. The board demanded cutbacks. I had to make difficult decisions. You understand how this industry functions. And honestly, Nora, you're a talented analyst. But you were never leadership material. That wounded more than anticipated. Not because I believed him, but because it echoed the same rhetoric I'd heard for years. Too methodical. Too precise. Too much, yet somehow never sufficient. You've made a mistake, he continued. And I don't merely mean walking away. You're destroying connections you might need later. Consider your future. Consider your son. That was the moment I felt the transformation. He had just attempted to use my child against me. You don't have the right to mention my son, I said, my tone colder now. And I'm not destroying connections. I'm forging my own. There was a prolonged pause, followed by a deep sigh. You know, he said, you used to be different. You used to be appreciative. That word, appreciative, as if everything I had earned was a gift. I was never appreciative for how I was treated, I said. I was dedicated. Loyal. But that loyalty ended when you determined I was disposable. I'm not the one who should be concerned about the future. You are. I terminated the call. That same day, Alexandra and I met in her downtown office. It was minimalist, contemporary, and flooded with natural light. But it wasn't the design that impressed me. It was the atmosphere. Everyone moved with intention. It felt vibrant. You managed that perfectly, she said, after I described the call. But prepare yourself. People like that don't retreat quietly. She was correct. By Thursday, the rumors began circulating. First on professional networks, then in internal channels I still had contacts in. He was constructing a new narrative, that I'd departed the firm voluntarily after underperforming, that I'd been resentful, unstable, and challenging to manage. It was so familiar, so predictable. I spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing my records, emails, project logs, and performance evaluations. For 6 years, I documented everything. Not because I anticipated needing it, but because I was the type of person who always preserved the evidence. That night, I received a message from Rebecca, a former colleague. Nora. I don't know if you've seen what's being claimed, but I want you to know I support you. We all recognize the truth. And if you ever need a witness, count me in. She wasn't alone. Over the next 2 days, I received more than 15 calls and messages from former coworkers, all sharing similar experiences. Credit appropriated. Promotions denied. Voices silenced. Many had been too intimidated to speak out. Some remained there, quietly enduring. You were the first to depart, Rebecca said. But now that you have, some of us are prepared to follow. By week's end, I had more than support. I had documentation. Screenshots. Messages. Internal memos. Fragments of a puzzle that illustrated years of manipulation, mismanagement, and unethical conduct. The remarkable aspect? I didn't need to utilize any of it, because the board of Garrison and Rhodes was already growing anxious. On Monday morning, a notice appeared on their investor page. The Westover contract had been officially terminated. Revenue forecasts were adjusted downward. Stock value declined 8% by midday. And then I received the email I hadn't anticipated. Nora, this is confidential, but the board is investigating leadership conduct. Several partners have expressed concerns about the handling of key accounts, including Westover. There's discussion of a leadership transition. You didn't simply walk away. You exposed something we'd all been ignoring. Anonymous. I read it 3 times before closing my laptop. My hands were steady now. He claimed I'd made a mistake, but it was becoming apparent that the only mistake I'd made was remaining as long as I did. By the following week, the whispers had transformed into headlines. Top financial consultancy loses flagship client amid leadership controversy. Garrison and Rhodes in crisis mode after executive reorganization. I observed from my home office as the updates accumulated. My laptop open, my phone illuminating every few minutes with new messages. Each one felt like a quiet validation. Not because I desired revenge, but because the truth was finally forcing its way into the light, the same truth they attempted to bury me with. At Chin Meridian, progress was accelerating. Alexandra and I were assembling a team. Brilliant, focused individuals, some who had left Garrison and Rhodes shortly after my departure. Others came from Alexandra's network, but every one of them shared the same motivation, to build something genuine, ethical, and exceptional. For the first time in years, I wasn't merely executing someone else's strategy. I was designing the framework. Still, I couldn't dispel the sensation that something else was approaching. My former supervisor, let's call him Daniel for clarity, wasn't someone who accepted defeat. Not silently, not ever. That Friday, my attorney, Morgan, called me. You're not going to appreciate this, she said bluntly. Proceed, I replied, steeling myself. Garrison and Rhodes filed a cease and desist order against you, claiming you utilized proprietary information from your tenure there to establish your own business and entice their client. I laughed, not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable. You mean the client whose contract I authored, whose strategy one developed, and who was already a professional connection of mine before I even joined Garrison and Rhodes? Morgan snorted. Exactly. It's an intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll panic and settle discreetly. Or preferably, surrender. Let them attempt it, I said. We've documented every action we've taken. But I want to be proactive. We're filing a countersuit. Defamation, wrongful termination, and professional misrepresentation. We'll also be submitting supporting statements from your former colleagues. Some have already signed. I reclined in my chair, gazing at the city skyline beyond my window. It felt surreal. A month ago, I was merely trying to preserve a position. Now I was defending my reputation in legal proceedings and reclaiming control of my narrative. But what surprised me most wasn't how rapidly things escalated. It was how many people rallied behind me. People like Thomas, one of the senior analysts I'd mentored. He reached out late that night. Nora, I've remained silent too long. I knew what Daniel was doing. We all did. You were the reason our strategy succeeded. He merely claimed the credit. I've attached a chronology of project credits showing where your name was removed or substituted in internal documents. Use it if necessary. Thomas. Then came Sophia, a former HR representative who'd left 6 months before me. Daniel pushed to modify your performance evaluations the quarter preceding your termination. I have the original files. You were rated exceeds expectations before it was altered to meets expectations. They were establishing the foundation to remove you. Sophia. I contemplated that for an extended period. Even knowing what I knew, it still wounded me. Not because I believed their falsehoods, but because they were so deliberate in crafting them. They hadn't merely used me. They had prepared to erase me. But now piece by piece, I was reclaiming the space they attempted to deny me. Morgan moved swiftly. Within days, she filed the response, attaching documented evidence of my original work, email exchanges with Alexandra and statements from 6 former employees, all willing to testify under oath. The cease and desist was withdrawn within 48 hours. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. It was the clearest admission of guilt I could have requested. The following week, Alexandra and I presented our official launch portfolio to prospective investors. Our proposition, a consultancy rooted in integrity, led by women, focused on sustainable strategy over immediate gains. The atmosphere was electric. We secured our first 3 contracts that afternoon. As I entered the elevator, I experienced a wave of emotions, pride, disbelief, and an undercurrent of sorrow for the years I'd spent waiting for permission to lead. I had always assumed the establishment would prevail. That the systems in place were too rigid, too protected. That sometimes the establishment forgets it's the people performing the work who sustain it. And when those people depart, the entire structure trembles. That evening, I collected Max from school. He ran to the car, beaming in that bright, uninhibited manner. "How was your day?" I asked. He fastened his seatbelt, then turned to me. "My teacher asked us who inspires us the most?" I said you. I glanced over, struggling to prevent my throat from constricting. "Why me?" I asked gently. "Because you didn't let them stop you. And because now you're the boss." I smiled, eyes moistening with tears. Not just because he recognized me, but because for the first time I recognized myself clearly too. By month's end, our new company was already creating ripples. Chin Meridian Advisors had officially secured 3 major clients, one of them a direct competitor of Garrison and Rhodes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same firm that once informed me I lacked executive polish was now watching from the periphery while I conducted strategy meetings with Fortune 500 decision-makers. But this wasn't about retribution. Not anymore. It was about reclaiming space and redefining what leadership resembled. Still, something transformed when the first media outlet contacted me. The article was titled, "From Discarded to Disruptor, the Woman Who Converted Her Termination into a COO Position." The journalist had conducted thorough research. She knew about the Westover contract, about my termination, and even referenced internal documents that had mysteriously been disclosed. "I'm not seeking conflict," I told her during our telephone interview. "But I am weary of pretending that what occurred was standard procedure." It wasn't. And I'm not the only one. When the piece was published, the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from other women, former employees, even individuals I didn't know. This gave me the courage to speak up at work. "Your story mirrors mine. Different names, identical tactics. I've been silent too long." "Thank you." I should have felt proud. Empowered. But something within me tensed instead. Because with each person who reached out, I realized just how pervasive the damage was. It wasn't just me. It never had been. And now everyone was observing, including Garrison and Rhodes. 2 days after the article appeared, Morgan called me. "They've engaged a crisis management firm," she said. "They're attempting to preempt this. I wouldn't be surprised if they issue a public statement soon." "Let them," I replied. But it wasn't merely a statement. It was a comprehensive campaign. They published an article on their website titled "Moving Forward, Learning from Experience and Building Stronger." It was filled with ambiguous language about miscommunications, team transitions, and internal improvements. They didn't identify me, but it was evident they were attempting to contain the damage. Then Daniel resurfaced in a podcast interview. "Naturally, I believe we exist in an era where people are quick to assign responsibility," he said smoothly. "Listen, I've made errors. We all have. But the reality is, not everyone is suited for the pressures of leadership. Sometimes individuals misinterpret decisions that are simply aspects of managing an enterprise." It was so impeccably rehearsed, I nearly laughed. But what followed surprised even me. That night, I received a connection request from someone I hadn't communicated with in over a decade. Rachel Turner, former executive partner, co-founder of Garrison and Rhodes. She had retired discreetly before I was ever promoted to lead analyst. But her name still carried influence in the industry. Her message was concise, unambiguous. "I've been following recent events. I believe you. If you're receptive, I'd like to meet." We convened for coffee in a secluded corner cafe in Cambridge. She appeared older than I recalled, but carried herself with the same quiet authority. "I resigned before Daniel assumed complete control," she said. "I observed some of the decisions being implemented and knew I didn't want to participate in that direction. But I never anticipated things would deteriorate this rapidly." "You knew?" I asked. She nodded. "I suspected, but I lacked evidence, and I wasn't courageous enough to investigate further." I studied her expression. There was no performance in her gaze. Just remorse. "You weren't the only one he attempted to erase," she continued. "You were simply the first to hold him accountable." She reached into her bag and handed me a flash drive. "These are internal assessments, meeting transcripts, and board communications from my final 6 months at the firm. I believe they'll reinforce your position if you choose to pursue this further." I accepted it, heart pounding. "Why now?" "Because it's time. The truth possesses more advocates than excuses," she said plainly. "And because you reminded me what authentic leadership resembles." We sat in silence momentarily. Two women from two different chapters of the identical story, one departing from a legacy, the other reclaiming her own. That night, I accessed the drive. She wasn't exaggerating. There were memos highlighting intentional manipulation of performance evaluations, transcripts of strategy meetings where Daniel discussed utilizing layoffs as a distraction mechanism during PR crises. Even a draft presentation to the board, titled Restructure Plan, quietly replace high-risk staff before IPO consideration. I wasn't a risk because of performance. I was a risk because I knew too much and because I posed too many questions. The next morning, I forwarded the materials to Morgan. Her response arrived just 4 minutes later. "We need to disclose this publicly. This isn't solely about your narrative anymore. This is systemic. Are you prepared?" I contemplated her message for an extended period. "Ready?" "No." "Prepared?" "Absolutely." The decision to go public wasn't taken lightly. I dedicated that entire weekend to reviewing everything with Morgan. Line by line, file by file. Ensuring every document, every timeline, every name was precise. We weren't merely exposing misconduct. We were establishing a precedent. By Monday morning, the story had been submitted to the Financial Chronicle, accompanied by a comprehensive evidentiary file. We also prepared a formal complaint to be sent to the state's Department of Labor and the SEC, citing patterns of employee misrepresentation and fraudulent investor disclosures during performance review periods. I anticipated feeling terrified when everything was published. But I wasn't. I felt composed, focused, and liberated. The article went viral within hours. Consultancy giant accused of systemic retaliation against whistleblowers. Internal documents reveal CEO plan to scapegoat employees. Former analyst Nora ignites industry reckoning. Suddenly, I had become the narrative, not the woman who was terminated, but the woman who refused to be erased. My phone didn't cease vibrating for 3 days. Journalists, former employees, women in financial firms from Boston to Los Angeles. Some called it brave. Others called it career suicide. But for me, it was neither. It was essential. On Wednesday morning, Alexandra entered my office, carrying 2 coffees and wearing an enormous smile. "You've disrupted the internet," she said, placing 1 cup before me. "I didn't intend to," I replied. "Precisely why it succeeded." She sat opposite me, examining my expression. "How are you truly feeling?" I paused. "Exhausted but resolute." "I knew you'd be the catalyst for change," she said softly. "But I didn't anticipate the ripple effect." She wasn't overstating. Within a week, 2 prominent executives resigned from Garrison and Rhodes. Anonymous sources confirmed the board had been cognizant of internal misconduct for years and had actively minimized concerns. A former HR director came forward on record confirming systematic efforts to downgrade performance reviews and silence employees who raised issues. The firm's legal counsel issued a statement promising a comprehensive restructuring. Daniel was placed on immediate administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His professional profile vanished overnight. No posts, no spin. Just silence. I didn't gloat. Not even momentarily. Because this was never about vengeance. It was about acknowledgement. Acknowledgement for the hundreds of employees like me. Quiet builders, invisible architects, those who ensure operations behind the scenes and are then dismissed without consideration. It was about rewriting the conclusion for ourselves, for each other. Max and I sat on the terrace that Friday evening. The air was mild for winter and the sky was adorned with streaks of crimson and indigo. "Mom," he said, looking up from his phone. "You're on television again?" I chuckled. "I know, tired of seeing my face?" "No," he said, leaning against my shoulder. "I think it's inspiring. You didn't allow them to treat you as if you were insignificant." I kissed the crown of his head, feeling the significance of what that represented. Not just for me, but for what he now believed was achievable in his own existence. Later that night, I sat at my desk, examining an invitation from a university in New York. They wanted me to address their annual Women in Finance Symposium. The title they proposed, "How to be the Architect of Your Own Authority." I accepted, not because I desired the spotlight, but because someone needed to articulate it explicitly. The way things have always functioned isn't the way they must continue. The following month, Garrison and Rhodes formally settled the case with a confidential financial resolution, public apology, and the resignation of 3 additional partners. More than monetary compensation, the settlement required them to implement new employee protections, an independent ethics committee and quarterly transparency reports. It wouldn't rectify everything, but it was a beginning. As part of the agreement, I declined a confidentiality clause. If they believed they could purchase my silence, they hadn't been attentive. I continued as COO of Chin Meridian, guiding the firm into its 2nd year with an expanded client portfolio, a reputation for integrity, and a wait list of applicants eager to join. But more importantly, I remained visible because stories like mine only matter when they're shared, when they remind others that their experiences aren't isolated. That silence isn't the price we pay for survival, that we determine when our story concludes. And for me, this wasn't the conclusion whatsoever. It was the commencement.